Let me start with this question, which is, industries go in cycles, and we see that, we have no better vantage point to see that than here at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And right now, retail and consumer are hot again. Haven't always been, but really are kind of back. And so I'm interested to hear from the panel why they think that is. I mean, what do you see that's causing this resurgence in interest in consumer and retail? Will, you want to start because you're the kind of
sure.
Nothing like a cold call after graduation. You think you're safe,
Yeah, perfect. So do you mean from kind of an investment perspective or just in general?
There's a lot of among entrepreneurs, and also we'll talk about the investment side later. But you see it from the vantage point of on the investment side.
I think consumer companies were always there and always happening and exciting during the bubble. I think from an investment perspective, as these things tend to be very cyclical, and investors tend to kind of all seem to follow the same paths. And as I think the tech opportunities subsided, consumer opportunities, or people just in general started looking for other opportunities, and consumer was one of those areas. So I think and some of the real big wins from an investment perspective have been with consumer companies, kind of branded consumer companies. And as the money follows, I think, or the money is more open to kind of investing in these type of companies, you have more and more entrepreneurs who start to pay attention there. And so I think that has kind of driven a lot of the innovation. And I think also there's been some really interesting focus on the consumer side on design, and I think that has created a lot of excitement and interest within consumer. I mean, things like you see what Apple's done with the iPod, and now with their new phone, and Method is done with kind of designing their bottles for kind of consumer household products, and so.
Yeah. Any of the others you want to jump in?
I think in some way it's related to your observation that some of us have been in technology. Technology has had a dramatic effect on consumer markets over the last 10 years, from design and development, the power of desktop tools for doing all the design tools for 3D modeling, and then transferring that information directly to manufacturing. So the speed from design to manufactured product to shelf is so fast now, and consumer markets thrive on change and fresh and new. And so now the manufacturers can actually drive a lot of change and churn in the market, and consumers love it. On the other side, on the branding side, building brands using all these new web technologies and all the social networking and all this kind of stuff that you can do online, and viral marketing has been facilitated by web technology. And so it's working on the consumer side and on the manufacturing side, and it's created a very dynamic environment for people in the consumer marketplace. And it's really exciting to be involved in it.
I think I stepped into this from sort of the opposite side, where I had been in engineering, and then I entered into the design world and went to graduate school in design specifically. At the time that I left, it seemed to me, as it always seems to somebody who's spent years focused on one thing or studying, that that's what the world was suddenly about. But I feel very much that there was, at that time, starting around in the mid-'90s, this resurgence of interest in design, or a new interest in design in the United States, where these major corporations are first starting to really understand that design can hit the bottom line and can really have an impact beyond that looks nice, and actually change consumer behavior and influence purchasing behavior and have that bottom line impact. And so I think we're seeing that there was a sort of a negative effect of that, which was that design was then applied cookie cutter to everything over and over again, and I was part of that, and part of designing the 10,000th new toothbrush that was launched in 2000. And we didn't need another new toothbrush. And so I think now what's happening is there's a return, and Apple, I think, is a great example, to meaningful design, and design that actually permeates the entire object and really gets beneath the surface of the object and changes the way that the consumer uses the product, rather than just changing how it looks on the shelf. I think that's the twist that's happening now.
Pete, I want to end with you in this round, and come back to this question of kind of technology background. I mean, you're involved with two of kind of the hardest core consumer products imaginable, beer and chocolate. It doesn't get any more real than that. And yet, kind of in the background, there's this. Is there a link? Is there a link between the tech and beer and chocolate?
Actually, not really. Not really. It turns out that I actually like.
I'm somewhat comforted by that, actually.
It turned out I liked my corporate jobs in general. Worked at Xerox initially, and then with a small telecom company, Rome, and grew with Rome, and got purchased with IBM, and actually liked my jobs. It took my friend, who had been at a VC firm on Sand Hill, saying, I see so many business plans across my desk. We're two smart guys, why don't we do our own thing? I told him, why would I want to start a company? I like my job in the big corporation. I got my MBA in the 70s when the typical path was to go corporate, so that's just natural for me. What we did, I told him, I'll talk to you about starting a company, but it has to be from the perspective of not talking about what we're going to do with the product. I said, let's talk about the company and see where that conversation goes. And after, I'm Jewish, he's not. We used to meet at the Jew and Gentile Deli in Mountain View. And what we came up with after several lunches was 3 basic goals for the company. And they were, whatever we did, product or service, because we didn't know, it had to be a world-class gold medal winning type of goal. We weren't going to do a basic commodity. We wanted to be something we could be passionate and really proud of. That was number 1. Number 2, we were only going to get into something that was on the ground floor of a new industry or a new segment of an industry. We weren't going to get into a crowded field. And last but not least, we would treat the product or service with reverence, but everything else with irreverence. If we're going to do it, let's have fun with it. So once we got those 3 elements, I thought maybe there is life after IBM.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the funding environment for these kinds of companies. What's out there? Is there money, and kind of where is the money?
So, I just a couple months ago left Mavron, which is a consumer-focused venture capital firm up in Seattle, and all we did is look at consumer companies. So there's definitely an incredible amount of attention and that's being kind of paid to this category. There is an incredible amount of money that's out there. I think you're starting to see a lot of venture capitalists who historically have kind of shunned consumer starting to dabble in it. That's probably been happening over the last few years, which is a good thing for entrepreneurs, but makes it difficult for other investors just because all of a sudden deals, like in every sector, become more competitive, valuations go up, and becomes tough to, a lot of kind of Me Too companies end up getting funded. So I think there's a lot of money out there. We would always focus on trying to find companies that had a product, had some revenue, clearly we're getting some, kind of in the early stages of getting consumer traction. And I think for entrepreneurs who are kind of at an earlier stage, there's an awful lot of angel investors who are out there who are willing to take more risk and seem to be more appropriate for kind of earlier stage. I mean, it's really tough from an investment perspective to figure out which consumer companies are really going to fly. And so we would always try to, again, find companies that really were getting some clear traction. But it's a lot of money.
I think the vast majority of these consumer deals fly under the radar screen of the venture capitalists. I've since joined Angel Investment Group, and we see a lot of consumer deals coming across our plate, and it really takes it takes sort of the angel investment community to get these things to a level where institutional investors might or might not be interested in talking about them. So.
Yeah, in general, the response we got, we had trouble finding, quote, VCs in consumer, but there are private equity groups that do invest. But as of yesterday, you really need $5 million in revenue before you get attention. That if you're starting something from scratch, it's we call it the F round, the friends, family, and fools.
Not mutually exclusive.
Yeah. not really. But even going to angel groups, you have to have something to show that. But you really have to get going with any small funds you can get from friends, family, and associates.
If you try, when we were out, and actually I first started talking with Mavron very early on, but when it was sketches and whatnot, we just had a contact. And so I think one of the first people I talked to was Will. What's interesting, first of all, is that everybody knows everybody. So it's not 6 degrees of separation, but a half a degree, we all know each other. And that's something that is just a necessary part of that fundraising process, especially when you're in a consumer deal, I feel, at least from my experience. But I think Jimmy Jane had its own challenges in that Jimmy Jane was not only consumer, which was really not hot, and if you say it's hot now, that's great, because we're always looking for money, and if it turns in that direction, so much the better. But you can probably name on one hand, Will could do this faster, who's actually really focused on consumer. And Mavron's one of the biggies, but there really aren't that many of them. So for us, we were going out, we were very early stage, we still are very early stage. We were looking for very little money because we didn't need a whole lot of money, and our company is about sexuality. And so you put those three things together, and your audience, that Venn diagram leaves a very small triangle in the middle of three people. But we found those three people, and now that people, that the Venn diagram is opening up as sexuality moves toward a niche market into more being this story about health and well-being and sort of a natural part of an adult lifestyle and so on. And as we progress as a business, we're no longer so small, we need more money, et cetera, that begins to open up again.
So the company is described in your bio as a privately held consumer products company that develops and manufactures premium accessories and consumables which integrate design, style, and innovation with sexuality. And I wasn't sure that meant what I thought it meant. So
it means exactly what
I went online, and it does. Let's talk a little bit about the process of kind of coming up with the idea, or narrowing down the idea, or however you want to think about it, and then coupled with that, vetting the idea. I mean, so this is I think consumer and retail is in some ways the hardest space, right? Because it's crowded. Right, and yet, as I think you've discovered, there's gigantic holes, right? But you don't know it was a gigantic hole until you filled it and the demand was there. So, how do you think about that process? How do you know whether your idea, is the thousandth, stupid idea in this particular space, or the one that's really worth pursuing?
Well, for me, it always starts with something that I'm personally passionate about, because I think the most successful consumer deals that I have seen were founded by people who were intimately familiar with the market or product or consumer, or were, typically are the consumer themselves. Timbuktu was started by a bicycle messenger. We got our start making messenger bags. I had been in the bag business before I got involved with Timbuktu, so it was something that I was intimately familiar with. And you just have to grok what you're working on. I mean, Steve Jobs loves his technology products, and I think if you look at lots of those brands, you'll see incredibly passionate people behind those brands, either as the CEO or as at least the driver of the brand and or product development process. Yeah.
Well, getting back to one of our core goals as a company, getting on the ground floor of a new industry or a new segment of an industry. When we started the beer company, when we first had this idea of getting on the ground floor, okay, so what's the opportunity? And sometimes you get lucky, and I thought we were smart, but luck does help. I was a home brewer at the time, and my partners never had alcohol to this day. But as we were talking about the company, I had won an award for a home brew competition. And he said, aren't there small companies like Anchor or Sierra Nevada? And I said, yeah. And he asked, do consumers like these beers versus Bud Miller and Coors? And I said, first of all, they're hard to find. You really have to go out of your way to find it, because in the early 80s, you didn't get good distribution. But when people discovered it, there was good word of mouth, and we thought even though we weren't going to be the first microbrewer, we were going to be in the first dozen or so. That if this wave that was starting to happen in the Bay Area, Seattle and Boston, took off and went national, then forget what Bud Miller and Coors were doing. That's a whole separate thing. That this full-flavored beer category we thought had a lot of potential, so we got in. And then after we sold it with the chocolate, I was done with my beer role in 2000. I had spent 2 years with the acquiring company. And I finally went to Belgium to meet Belgian brewers, and every town I got taken to for beer, they had great chocolate. And I went over 5 or 6 times in 2000, 2001. Every time I came back, I kept wondering, why is it that chocolate in Belgium in particular, or Europe in general, is so much better than the crap we have here? And that reminded me of why I got in the beer business, because we had crap beer versus Europe. And when I did the research, you could see that there were actually government regulations that specified the minimum amount of real chocolate that has to go into chocolate. Here it's like 10% for milk chocolate, in Europe it's 25%. So big differences. And coming back and finding that stuff out, then looking around and seeing companies like Scharfenberger or Joseph Schmidt or guys like that, Lake Champlain Chocolate, you could see the micro chocolatiers were opening up. And I thought, maybe the trend in beer was no growth, $50 billion a year, but a segment opened up. And in chocolate, it's a $15 billion a year business with no growth. And I thought this trend. So what did I do? I went to Stanford Business School, and I got 3 second-year MBAs to help on a business plan to see if they could research the gut feel. And we got enough information to see that the trend on premium chocolate was similar to the trend on micro beer.
And then you went to culinary school and putted around in the kitchen.
Yep.
That sounds like fun.
It was the hardest schooling I've ever been to. But it's the only time I've been in a class where the professor said, if you have time to lean, you have time to clean.
I'm going to write that one down. It's put that in the strategy. Will, your thoughts on this question?
I guess I would echo some of Mark's comments that I really think it is a lot about finding something you're really passionate about. It's really, really hard to build businesses, and so there's a lot of bumps in the road, and you got to have kind of the perseverance and passion to kind of live your dream and work 24/7 to try to make something happen. So, I think there's a lot of great ideas. A lot of times, many ideas don't turn into successful businesses, and for a variety of reasons, could be market timing, and could be you don't have enough capital or the right people resources. But I think you see example kind of time after time of companies where you've had a really passionate and persistent entrepreneur who's had a vision and may have been, usually the entrepreneurs are a little ahead. Sometimes they're behind, but a lot of times it's too far ahead of the consumer market, and they have to wait for the market to kind of evolve and things to kind of catch up. But ultimately, you have really great, really exciting businesses that get built. Yeah.
So your bio doesn't actually say what you're doing now. It's like really mysterious. Do you want to demystify it all?
Yeah, sure. Happy to talk about it. So, as I mentioned, end of September left this venture capital firm and am now starting a consumer product company in the health and wellness space. So, doing basically a line of branded nutraceutical products, if people know what that is. So, kind of if you think along the lines of what Airborne and Emergency have done as kind of single products, kind of evolving it and incorporating some design elements and kind of a healthier, more holistic solution, basically. So,
Ethan, anything to add?
So you're asking me if I'm passionate about what I do. I'm passionate about design, and that's been my background for, that's what I've done for many years, and particularly the intersection of product design development and brand experience and how those two are intertwined. So I was at a small design firm, then a much larger design firm. I was at Frog Design. I was a lead designer there in the San Francisco office. And I left after a torturous project there, the biggest one they had ever had on the product development side, on the hard goods side. And I wanted to start my own consumer products sort of consulting firm, specifically around design. And started designing a line of shoes and a line of flat panel monitors, and it's a variety of projects for different clients, so always as a consultant. Mm-hmm. And then I had 3 people come to me with completely unrelated to one another, asking me to look into products relating to sexuality. And it doesn't take, I like to think that I have my ear to the ground and I sense the trends coming. That's part of what a designer's job is. In this case, I would have had to have been deaf. And so I went to a trade show and saw just this array of products. And after I got over, what I was looking at and got comfortable with it, that happens relatively quickly. You'd be surprised when you're in a room full of products that you start gesturing with them and so on. And so for me, once I got comfortable, what I started to see around me was really a final frontier for design, and a place where design had not yet had a chance to have that impact. Mm-hmm. The impact of closing the gap between what a consumer is looking for and what's made available to them. And that's always what I've been focused on. And I started sketching. It just seemed like a fascinating place to start. And so that's my passion sort of lies there. But then on top of that, sexuality, I think, is so, and I think this is believed by everybody on the team, it's so universal And so it has the ideal startup element, right? Who isn't interested in sex? Well, everybody has this interest in sex. They're willing to express it or explore it to varying degrees. But I believe it's innate in all of us. And so there is that innate drive from a Darwinian psychology standpoint. So it's in all of us, and there's this universal interest. But then it's the sort of design trick, and what makes it difficult is that it's as individual in each person as a fingerprint. And so how do you design for everyone and yet design for the individual at the same time and leave room for them to bring to it what's important to them? And that seemed like the most complicated and exciting design problem that I could ever pose to myself, and that's really why this whole thing started for me.
Yeah, fascinating. So let's talk a little bit about timing. I mean, some of you have done this early in your careers and later in your careers. Some of you have come to the consumer retail piece after kind of more traditional something else. A lot of our students are sitting here thinking about, is this something you should go out and do out of business school? Any advice? How do you think about the earlier versus later decision?
Well, I started Pete's Brewing Company in 1986, and then went to the chocolate company. And what I like to say is I haven't worked since 1986. Put in a lot of hours, but I haven't worked. And my suggestion is, if you're passionate about something, it's the most fantastic feeling on earth. So follow your passion. Do it sooner rather than later.
I think on that note, it might, from my experience, it sort of found me as much as me finding it. And so it's hard for me to imagine sort of forcing the issue and saying that now I need to come up with my next big idea, and what is that, and I'm going to go and pursue that. That seems very difficult. I think after having been through it a couple of times, for instance in Pete's case, and most notably the way that he sort of describes recognizing the same sorts of trends, that might be different. But as a first timer, for me, it just kind of had to happen to me, and I had to be at the right place at the right time and have the sort of epiphany.
I guess for me, what I would say is, it becomes, I think, for most people, I mean, there's no right answer, really. I mean, there's so many different paths that have worked for so many different people and types of people in different stages in their life. But I think statistically, if you look at individuals as they get older, as you get married, as you have kids, it becomes a little more difficult to kind of take the entrepreneurial leap. So if you have an idea that you're passionate about, you absolutely have to go for it. I mean, it's probably the hardest thing you'll do, but it's also one of the most rewarding things you'll ever do, I think. And so for me, I started a small restaurant chain when I was before coming to business school. Went to business school, did venture capital, kind of took some time off from being an entrepreneur, and now I've gotten back into it. And part of it was, didn't really have an idea that I was really passionate about, and for me, venture kind of gave me a nice way to see a lot of different businesses in a lot of different stages, kind of develop some pattern recognition, and then when you finally find something you're excited about, kind of had the tools and was ready to hop back out and build something. So, but if you got something you're excited about, you gotta go for it. So.
But I think that's exactly right. Is that there is a lot of sacrifice that's involved, and I think that will vary depending on where you are in your career. And I am the least experienced of everybody sitting up here, and these guys have all sort of been through it a couple of times. And I will say, certainly later on. So Will said, we were talking beforehand. He said, "Oh yeah," I asked, "Did you close any money?" "Oh yeah, I closed a little bit of money," and that just how offhand and easy that is for Will at this point in his career, I think is, I would venture to guess that the first time that Will went out for funding, it was very different. I think you can continue to do this on and on and on throughout your life, but I think that early start, there is a huge sacrifice that's made, and it doesn't feel like a sacrifice at the time. It's almost you look back and wonder, where did that last year go? And that's sort of where I am right now. I can't believe how quickly time is passing. And so there is a time, I think, just pragmatically speaking, that's a lot easier to do. And I think that I didn't have any formal training whatsoever. In design, yes, but not of the sort that the students here get. And so they're absolutely prepared. It's just to make those sacrifices, you have to have the idea that you're willing to make those sacrifices for. Otherwise, it will feel like a sacrifice. It doesn't feel like a sacrifice to me. To Pete's point, it doesn't feel like working.
So I have one more question for the panel, and then I'll open it up to Q&A. So the question is this. I mean, several of you have referenced Apple and Steve Jobs, and one of the things that's pretty unique to them is they do design and then they do manufacture. And part of the reason they do manufacture is they want to keep control of design, right? And easy for them to do, hard for a startup necessarily to kind of do everything in its vertical chain. So how have each of you kind of thought about where to specialize your efforts in terms of what you do and what you let others do?
Well, I don't think Apple's any different than they outsource everything to subcontractors. So they used to have a factory over in Fremont, but today Apple uses the same model that I had a factory for Timbuktu in San Francisco, but we also had subcontractors in Vietnam and China. I mean, everybody in business today is forced with to face the reality of you need to use your resources efficiently, and you need to go seek the expertise in what it is you want to have made. And to develop that expertise yourself is unnecessary. Nobody needs another bag factory. There's a lot of really great ones. Nobody needs another computer factory. There's a lot of them out there. And you'd be foolhardy to spend your money developing that rather than developing your brand and your products and your experience for your consumers. So, I just think that Apple's extraordinarily good at what they do, and that's the focus on design and brand building and the consumer experience. And Steve's very passionate about it. So,
well, in getting in the beer business, my partner and I both thought that the necessity of building a brewery wasn't there. We viewed building brick and mortar was more to your ego than to a business requirement. And I thought if we can find another brewery with excess capacity that would be willing to work with my formula, getting our foot in the door would be a lot easier. As a matter of fact, we started the company on $15,000. We got our first production, 200 cases, but we got product on the shelf to test the market for only $15,000. We also thought, as a startup, and even if we ever got to be a small company, that we couldn't be all things to all people. And we thought a key differentiator in the world of beer would be to have a direct sales force. Most breweries rely on the distributors to sell their product. We felt we had to have our own people in the market to work with the wholesaler and the retailer. And that was a key differentiator. So instead of putting all of our dough into brick and mortar, we put it into building a sales force, and that really helped grow our company.
I would echo a lot of these comments. I mean, it's an incredible time to be building a business, and because there is so much you can outsource. I mean, right now, like my company will basically be virtual probably for quite a while, and I'll have full manufacturing and marketing capabilities, and slowly I'll start to bring some of that in-house. But some of these, I guess the nature of this business, if you look at a company like Airborne, when they were sold for $270 million, they had 6 full-time employees, and everything else was outsourced. And so it's you got variable costs. You can access people who are really experts in all these different fields, and you focus on kind of what you're good at and what you're passionate about, which might be the kind of the brand and the marketing, and maybe developing the distribution relationships. And if you're don't have the expertise in the manufacturing or some part of your supply chain, there's usually people out there who have tremendous expertise that you can partner with. So
the challenge is to find them.
To find them, exactly.
You can stumble badly on the outsourcing.
Sourcing is definitely a challenge and an ongoing one. Jimmy Jane has started its production in the United States, actually in the Bay Area, really, with almost all the products. There are a couple products now that are components come from overseas. All of our packaging comes from overseas now. And as volumes ramp, we shift product overseas. But the first products that we designed were specifically designed to require no tooling, so there were no upfront costs. And so they are very high per piece costs, and but there was no startup cost really. Now, actually, I have a new product which I can show, or just put up here. This is this new product called Form 6, and Form 6 is a vibrator, or a vibrating massager. But it's, I think, a good representation of what Jimmy Jane is doing and what sets us apart. We don't outsource any design. We do have a phenomenal engineering team that we work with that's outside of our business. But there are a lot of businesses now entering our space that are sort of rebranding, private labeling product, and trying to change the context, which is really what Jimmy Jane is doing, of the sort of conversation around this category of products. but it's all the same product over and over again from these other companies. And what we're able to do, because of our we started from design and innovation, is to have that permeate everything that we do, whether it's a candle or it's a vibrating massager. And that's what is opening doors for us. And we need to maintain that differentiation. So there is a cost, but the cost is a lot lower for us, and we can move much faster as a result. This product is made in its entirety in Asia. But as a result, I flew to Asia every month for the past 6 months, and it's extremely wearing, and there's just really no way around it. I'm the person that can do that right now. We've just made a new hire and somebody who can start to take over some of those duties, but you have to pick your partners very carefully and grow those relationships. And when you have a downtime, when something goes awry, if you don't have that personal relationship with those people, they won't be there, and if you do, they will, and that's amazing. It's amazing what our partners on the retail side and on the manufacturing side have been willing to do for Jimmy Jane, because they believe in us and they know us and we have that relationship with them.
How is it different from other consumer products in that it's not like design can play a role, you can necessarily lead your customer? I mean, I think people would taste it, maybe they seem like they probably just slow to do it, and you have to kind of reach a more general audience right at the start. Or is that true?
I think it very much depends on on the focus of the restaurant. I can't speak to beer, but that seems like you had kind of a niche focus there initially. For us, my restaurant was called World Wrap, so we were kind of in the quick service business, and it wasn't, we were trying to do something that was kind of a higher end product that was definitely focused on kind of the consumer who was looking for a healthier something to eat, was looking for it in kind of faster timetable, and the whole quick service category really didn't exist. So I don't know, we thought of ourselves as being somewhat pretty focused anyway.
Was it tough though with something like that? Because people weren't necessarily looking for fast food, people used to.
It's a product that people, food in some ways is one of the easiest things to sell. People are always looking for something great to eat, and it's it's difficult to deliver on a consistent basis, but if you're able to deliver a good tasting product and do it in a reasonable time frame and a reasonable price point, it's a pretty kind of proven formula. For us, we were introducing a completely new product. The wrap hadn't existed before, and so that was, it took a little while for people to kind of understand what that was, and actually we didn't call it a wrap until about a month or two before we opened, and people, as we talked about it, it was a burrito at the time, and people just couldn't quite understand that, and the world didn't need another burrito, and so we came up with this idea, but then once people tried it, it was ultimately, we had really high-end food in the early days and had a chef from a 4-star restaurant kind of creating it, so it was really high-end cuisine, and we were very lucky, and things kind of, we did some marketing to kind of get the word out and let people try the product, and that kind of drove things from there. So
we believed we had to differentiate on just about everything. When I talked about what our goals of the company, my partner and I talked about goals of whatever we did. One was to have fun with it, treat the product with reverence, but everything else without reverence. We knew to be seen on a shelf, you had to have a label. And we had no consumer experience, to be honest. We just had this gut feel. Why would somebody look for our beer on the shelf versus hundreds of others? And it occurred to us we had to have a name that would at least have people look at the bottle, then a label that they might want to pick up and read, and then a product that'll deliver. So we could have called it Pete's Ale or Pete's Brown Ale, but we wanted to show that we were differentiating, and we wanted to get an adjective that would be a hook. And we did the whiteboard thing, throwing up all these names, nothing worked. And a radio DJ in San Francisco, Alex Bennett, a comedian, used to have visiting comedians on, and Bob, the Bobcat Goldthwait was on one day and did a routine with wicked this, wicked that, and we said that's going to be our hook. And it was a real differentiator to have consumers at least want to try us.
Thank you. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about from both reception to funding sources as well as generating channel pull, whether solving customer pain points is maybe a better play in consumer space as opposed to solving customer pleasure points.
Well, there's all kinds of talk about differentiation and finding your way to market. through making your product more innovative or somehow different. I mean, there's so many different ways to do this. My experience has been, I was in the bag business. I mean, it's a pretty lowly business if you think about it, and a business that really runs on very incremental change. I mean, computer bags hadn't changed in the 10 years since I was designing them for Kensington to when I started designing them for Timbuktu. And we just sat down and said, well, great, they haven't changed for 10 years, let's update them a little bit. And we did some very basic things, whether they were painful for consumers. What we did show is we just cared about what was inside the bag in addition to what's outside the bag. And it was just slow, methodical, proving to our consumers that we were thoughtful about what we do, whether it was little tiny things or maybe some more innovative things. And we had some pretty significant innovations at Timbuktu while I was there. But a lot of it was just incremental, block and tackle, keep doing what you do really well, and keep proving day in, day out that you're there for the consumer. And, that was what worked for us.
If there's pain, pleasure. I think that I think that the pain points are actually a pretty obvious place to start usually, because so in our industry, what I saw when I first was there at that trade show were products that were noisy, ugly, frightening looking in most cases, had porn stars in the packaging, were toxic in many cases, containing phthalates and other chemicals that are banned in baby teethers and other products. But in this category, adult novelties is sort of a liability dodge that on the back of all these products it says, for adult novelty use only. There's just no regulation here, and so that's the low-hanging fruit. And I guess there is a positive feedback loop associated with removing pain, but I think that you need to add on to that the pleasure of a great sort of interaction, and there's no longer pain around dealing with your MP3s, and yet iPods continue to really grow and sell, and I think that has to do with taking that experience to the next level and adding service to that, as opposed to just removing issues. But I think that is the starting point. There's maybe more of a cycle there.
Ethan and I are both designers, so I think we're probably both driven by this notion that we can do it better. And I see things in my market space, and I just look at them and go, God, I could do that a lot better. And and better sometimes is better function or better style or just being more in tune with where the market is today. One reason consumer products change all the time is that the context is always changing. You have a new generation of people coming along every 5, 10, 15 years, and they're thinking about the world differently. The internet didn't exist when I was in the age range of most of my consumers at Timbuktu. Now it does, and so we did things that kind of updated around what new technology and what new lifestyle things people were doing. And I think in all consumer markets, food changes that way. Now ethnic foods are really in. You're keying in on a interesting trend for nutraceuticals, and chocolate and beer have been, of course, gone through their cycles. So there's always something out there to do, some wave to catch.
You're right, and I think somebody said to me very early on, to a hammer everything looks like a nail, and my hammer is definitely design. Yeah. And so, well, let's redesign that, and we need to redesign this. And actually, I had a conversation with another entrepreneur recently, and he asked me, he's a little bit earlier stage, and he asked me how I figured this out or figured that out, and shipping, how did you find your freight forwarder, and who's the best one, and why do you find this interesting? And I said, it's all designed to me. And I didn't even hear it when I said it, but every time I see him now, he says, it's all designed to you. And it is, because it's designing processes, it's designing product, it's designing consumer interaction, it's designing a retail relationship. It's all design, and that's what it looks like to me. And that can be a flaw, and you need to understand that everybody's bringing their unique perspective. Actually, the president of our company is here today, and she would tell you the same thing. She would say, there are times, and I think I'm getting better at recognizing when I'm just using my design hammer again, that it's not necessarily always the right hammer, and you just have to find people who have other hammers. I don't know how that has anything to do with the question that was asked, but I do think that we do take a design approach, and it doesn't have to be a design approach, but just recognize what your hammer is and make sure that you're using it appropriately.
Great.
Yeah, well, first the question at the back, you were next, yeah.
My question is more around changes in the retail space, its impact on entrepreneurial opportunities in consumer products. Because of all these mass merchandisers and retail play, do you generally think there's more opportunities in maybe premium, high-end, vertically integrated consumer products rather than low price points?
Life's too short to make junk. That's what we always said at Timbuktu. We didn't want to be in the $50 bag space. We wanted to be in the $100 to $200 bag space. There's a lot of crap out there, and there's a lot of people to make it. And interestingly enough, we were approached really aggressively by Target, and of course Target has made a name for themselves by going out and getting name brand designers to do products for them and use that as a differentiation for their mass market approach. We resisted them because we didn't feel our brand was ready for that, and it would have buried us operationally to fulfill their requirements. But my view has always been one of going after a niche and really honing your skill and building your brand in a niche where people really care and are passionate about what you're doing. That goes hand in hand with my passion for it. So I want to be passionate about what I do, and I want to sell to people who are passionate about what they're buying. I also didn't want to be in the $2,000 bag space because I don't want to suffer those people who buy those products. Okay, I like people who are stepping up because it's meaningful for them, not throwing down a bunch of money because it means nothing to them. So.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, there's just a lot of different paths out there, and so there's people who have built, $100 million businesses just selling cat litter at Costco. If that's what you're doing, those are probably very nice businesses from a cash flow perspective, but ultimately it comes back to kind of what you're passionate about. For me, it's also about kind of building, kind of premium products, and I think it is about creating brands. And if you really focus and think a lot about kind of the distribution that you choose in the early days to help kind of build the right brand, you create a lot more value, and you create a lot more opportunity for as to where your product ultimately ends up going. And it's also, I think, as a startup, you don't have much leverage, and so if you're dealing with kind of the mass market retailers, they're going to dictate the terms. You're going to be paying more than you need to. No one's going to take care of where you go on the shelf, and so it's just much. I think it's smarter to kind of focus a lot on whether it's direct to consumer or figuring out some differentiated ways to kind of build this higher quality product that starts to generate some buzz, that starts to create some pull out in the marketplace, where then you have the retailers coming to you, and then you can make the decision as to whether or not you want to go and sell at the Costco's or Walgreens of the world.
One of Jimmy Jane's first products was a $475 platinum vibrator, and we also have a gold vibrator and a steel one, and that was really the sort of anchor of the launch line of products that we put out there. And there were a number of reasons to do that. One, we wanted to solve the issues that I mentioned with the products that were out there. But we also really wanted to start to change the context of this conversation. As I mentioned before, we've sold those products through Louis Vuitton, their private members club in Tokyo. We sell through Selfridges. We sell through Fred Segal in LA. We sell through Ukes, which is a $95 million online retailer of high-end fashion, Alexander McQueen and whatnot. But Jimmy Jane is not a luxury brand. Jimmy Jane fundamentally is about inclusion, not exclusion. And I think that you just need to know exactly what you're going after. For us, that was a way of changing the dialogue. But what we're about is for each person, no matter what their comfort level with sexuality, or no matter what price point is accessible to them, or no matter what retail chain that is available to them, we want to be able to give them a product to enhance their sexuality that is available to them. And Jimmy Jane, just even the name, is meant to be it's not some French name you can't pronounce. It's a very simple, straightforward American brand creating innovative products and putting them out there. Some of them happen to be luxury, and some of them happen to be available through much broader distribution. And you'll see Form 6, this new product, in stores across the country. And it's a little bit too early to announce exactly who's going to be carrying this, but just know what challenges you will face if you take on specifically and solely luxury. And I think that not suffering those customers is an interesting way of putting it. It's what are you interested in building, and what do you want to stand for?
Let's get some more questions in. Yeah, Vanessa.
What do you think creates a great brand?
authenticity. So I think it's delivering on what you say you're going to deliver to your consumers. I think it can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different products, obviously, but creating that trusted relationship with your consumer, I think, is a sign of a really great brand.
Timbuktu was a really interesting experience for me because when I came to the company, it was already 13 years old and had a cult following. In an urban environment, it started with messengers, but messengers was not a market. I mean, there's hardly any messengers around, so we knew we couldn't build the company the way we needed to by making more messenger products. So as time went on, we would have people. We'd be in places where there were a lot of messengers, and they would start dissing Timbuktu, and they would say, "Oh well, we don't buy Timbuktu anymore." A lot of them still do, but I would say, "Well, why not?" "Well, they make crappy bags," and I'd say, "Well, that's not exactly true because we're making bags exactly the same way we were 13 years ago. Matter of fact, we're making them even better now." And then when you finally dug into it, they would say, "Well, because they make women's purses now." The notion was that we had gone outside of where they wanted us to be. In fact, our core market was always asking us for new products, and they loved, the women who were buying our products loved the fact that we got involved in more products that were more directed towards their needs. And so my takeaway from that was always, I don't mind if one of our consumers says they don't want to buy our brand anymore because we're making a product or somehow it doesn't meet their lifestyle needs. I never want them to say we don't make great bags. And we stayed true to one thing at Timbuktu, and that was that every bag or accessory that we made was as good as any messenger bag that we'd ever made, because messengers are brutal on their bags. That taught us and informed us how to make great products. And so we stuck true to making great products, and our brand integrity always went back to that authenticity. And that's a great word today because you have so many people out there trying to create brands from scratch and using all these technologies to drive them out into the market, mostly the internet. And all of us as consumers are going, well, what is this brand? Who the hell are these people? Is this something someone just cooked up last night? Or is this a company that's been around for a long, long time? Or are the founders people who have been involved for a long, long time? I'm in the process now of figuring out what to do next, and I think about, well, do I want to start a brand from scratch? And if I do that, can I use at least can I borrow my authenticity from having been in the business for 20 years rather than having had the brand around for 20 years? Timbuktu was fantastic because I had already all this heritage behind me and all this authenticity. But as we're starting new brands, how do we get authentic quickly so that people trust what we're doing? So trust and authenticity behind the brand is really important.
So Pete, how do you think about that? I'm talking about cooking it up last night and new brand.
The authenticity is pretty critical. When we started our company, we wanted to take the Ben & Jerry's approach. High quality product, have some fun with it. But we also believed that people get behind real people. And if you were visible, it just adds to that credibility. Now, it would have been Mark and Pete's Brewing Company or Pete and Mark and Pete's Brewing Company. Anyway, Mark decided at the last minute not to have his name on it because he doesn't drink, and I was the brewer. To reinforce that, I took the role, not running the company in the office, but I took the role on being the outside guy, promoting the category, promoting the company, but being visible. So if you reinforce it, it just adds to the authenticity. We also believed in our marketing approach not to go after a demographic. Well, you're making beer, isn't that mostly male, or chocolate, mostly female? And we believed we were going after a psychographic, people who wanted high quality product, but didn't take themselves seriously, and that's what we were focused on.
Great. Yeah.
Just going to ask a follow-up question about authenticity. It seems that authenticity isn't, Pete, if I remember correctly, you actually didn't own your breweries. You basically leased space from someone else.
We contract manufactured.
So yeah, you contract manufactured. So it wasn't that you had your own brewery that you were sweating in to make the beer. It was more of a presentation of authenticity that you believed in the product. And I wonder if, I just wanted to sort of add on to that because I think some people might walk away and say, well, gee, authenticity is really about, I started in my basement and then I built up my next little, it's sort of the thing that your competitors would go after, Budweiser, saying, well, here's our first building or second building and all this heritage. I don't think you, to start a new company like some of you are doing, I don't think you necessarily have to have that decades of authenticity of what you're doing. It's more sticking to one technology.
Well, just to reinforce this, having your brewery, not having your brewery, we took a lot of heat for being a quote contract manufacturer. But you know who the heat came from? It wasn't from any consumer. They just wanted a high quality product. It was from the other brewers. So it was not a big issue.
I think that authenticity comes from the alignment or misalignment of your product and your beliefs, and we've been talking about that throughout this. And so the Jimmy Jane, where this sort of manifests itself most readily within Jimmy Jane is that none of us, we talk about inclusion and we talk about it being very approachable, and I think that what has really resonated with us, particularly in the early days when we're first time talking with Vogue and with W or L and these magazines and so on, who had never really had conversations about these kinds of products before. I'm there with some other founders, and we're talking about what we're doing, and they can tell that we are as uncomfortable with the subject matter as they are, and that's why we're creating these products. Because while we're uncomfortable, we also recognize the need and have an interest and want to have that served. And there are, our competitors. Some of them are $500 million companies. There are giant manufacturing companies out there, Doc Johnson, Topco Sales, and they can go and they can hire an Ethan from the design side, but they can't hire a team that really believes the way that we believe or has the sort of background that we have. That is really just part of our culture, and so the products and the marketing are really a reflection of our culture. And so you come to our office and it feels like Jimmy Jane. And I would argue that the same is true of Pete's product and his business that he was building, whether or not for us that includes a factory in Taiwan, and that factory in Taiwan, does that feel like Jimmy Jane? I hug my manufacturer every time I get off the plane. He meets me at the airport, and that's Jimmy Jane to me because he's my partner, but it doesn't look like a Jimmy Jane facility. And so it's not as easy to put your finger on. It's really, I think, where your team lives here, and whether they're doing it to make a buck or whether they're doing it to make a buck because they believe in it. But making a buck is generally going to be in there.
Let's see if we can squeeze in another couple of questions. There's one here and then one there. Yeah.
What type of trends do you see in the way that consumers interact with your products, and the way they go up purchasing your products, and how do you see those trends extending over the next 5, 10 years?
Well, a lot more online purchasing, for sure. And so, and that's fantastic for us as entrepreneurs, because being able to sell direct to the consumer is an essential part of being able to make money in most of these markets. It's hard to make money making consumer products because there's just a lot of people chasing every nook and cranny in the business. And so being the low-cost producer is not normally, in our cases, the option, especially when we're just starting out. So being able to access the consumer directly, and then also being able to have a dialogue with that consumer directly, is incredibly valuable. It informs your next product move, whether it's a modification to existing product or a brand new product. And especially as a founder or CEO, engaging in that dialogue is so powerful. It's shocking how people are shocked to get a letter from the CEO. And some people are like, holy cow, I would have been a lot more diplomatic in asking my question if I'd known you were going to answer the question. We would get these flaming emails, and then I would write back to them. They're like you just tell how embarrassed people were. And then we would go on this dialogue, and normally we could create a very positive situation out of things that start off negatively. But those were fantastic interactions, and it's consumer direct. It's related to technology today. And so we were always looking at ways of exploiting current technology trends, and not in a way that would make our ballistic nylon stronger, but in a way that would make our brand stronger.
Right, last question.
I just wanted to ask, we talk a lot of business school about sustained competitive advantage, and the things, this might be a harsh critique, but the things I've heard you say where your advantages were slight design changes, or a cool adjective in the name, or maybe a different application for the same type of product. How did you look at the competitive advantage you have, and how did you put resources to build that?
I never looked at a competitor as a competitor. People would say, who's Timbuktu's competitor? And, obviously we had tons of competitors. The bag market is an incredibly crowded marketplace. But we didn't think about the world that way because we had customers, retailers that we had partnerships with, and so we just focused on how can we be the best for our retail partners and for our end consumers who pull that product through the channel. And we just, we were aware of what other people were doing, but we just, I used to say we look out the front windshield. We don't look backwards to see who's knocking us off, and we don't knock anybody else off. We just keep doing what we do, block and tackle every day. And it's just stick to your business and get on with it. Competitors would knock us off, flagrantly. And when they did, we would go after them. But for the most part, we figured no one knows what we're going to do next. Anyone can see what we've already done, but nobody knows what we're going to do next.
Yeah, I'd say innovation, and I'll make this really quick. If you look at Apple again, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a techie who would say that the iPod is the best MP3 player or media player out there, but it's by far the best selling. And why is Apple? There is innovation there, but a lot of the innovation is not just a technological innovation. It's an innovation in terms of how they're presenting their products and how they're having them tap into their consumers' lives and fit in and insinuate themselves, and that's that competitive advantage. So for us, it's that same sort of innovation. We won't outsource that. We do it ourselves.
It really is all designed to you.
It is all designed.
And on that note, I really want to thank the panelists. I've had a lot of fun. I think it was really